one of the things that surprised me about backable people was just the amount of practice that they tend to go through before getting inside a room. And I know that might sound a little bit obvious, or might sound a little too normal, but the reality is that we tend to see people who come off as very polished, and we think to ourselves, well, that must be just a naturally charismatic person. But in the vast majority of the cases, what I found is that that was the product of lots and lots of sloppy practice, what I call in the book exhibition matches that don't look nearly as good as sort of the final result. Back when people play lots and lots of exhibition matches. In fact, the first time I started talking to someone about exhibition matches, it was a jazz musician who was also this fantastic speaker, and he's an entrepreneur. And I asked him, how many exhibition matches, how many practice rounds does he play before he gets inside a room to give a presentation for a new idea? And he said 21 times. 21 times, which I thought was kind of overkill, right? And I went and talked to a bunch of different people about this. And when I shared with all sorts of backable people the number 21, no one batted an eye. So what I decided to do was put that into practice myself. I started to practice 21 times before getting into a room to share anything new, or before an interview or pitching an investor. And what I thought was going to happen was that it was actually going to make me less natural. I thought practicing anything that much and being just that practiced was going to make you sound a little bit robotic, a little bit too mechanical. But I found the exact opposite to be the case. What it ended up doing was it freed up so much mind space, because I had such a mastery of my material that I was able to really focus on the other people in the room. I was able to achieve a level of presence that I wouldn't have ordinarily had. So that was kind of the foundation of this idea of playing 21 exhibition matches. Now the question becomes, like, who are you playing it with? Who are the people you're surrounding yourself with? And what I found is, again, that backable people tended to surround themselves with a circle of trusted people. Just like in life, in business, they surrounded themselves with a circle of people that they trusted when they were thinking about new ideas and thinking about ideas for their career, thinking about new projects to go take on. They had people that they were practicing these ideas in front of. And it tended to be that they had the four similar personalities in their circle. It may have been more than this, but that there tended to be at least 4 of these roles in every circle. And I want to walk through those 4 roles. I call them the 4 C's. So the first is your collaborator. So when you're with this person, you kind of feel like you're almost in a musical jam session with them. They're using language like yes, and they're building on top of your ideas. Your collaborator. The second C is your coach. And the reason your coach is different than your collaborator is because while your collaborator is sort of focused on whether your idea is going to fit the market, or whether it's good for the company, basically good for your audience, your coach is really focused on, is this idea good for you? Because there are plenty of ideas out there that could be great, but are they good for you? Do they really fit who you are? Are you really going to want to spend the coming years on the other side of doubt and rejection and all the things we know it takes for bringing something new into the world? So that's your coach. The third is your cheerleader. And, your cheerleader is pretty self-explanatory, and it may sound a little cheesy, but we all need that cheerleader in our lives. This is somebody you call for that confidence boost, and you're going to get it no matter what. One of the people I studied for the book was Ellen Levy. Fast Company magazine named her the most connected woman in Silicon Valley. So she got Fortune 500 CEOs, and she's got members of Congress in her Rolodex. And I asked her, who do you call before you walk into a room? And she said, well, that's easy. I call my mom. So your cheerleader. The fourth C, though, I think is probably the least appreciated, but I think probably one of the most, if not the most important, one of the most important, which is your critic. But I like to call this person your cheddar. And the reason I call this person your cheddar is because if you've ever seen the movie 8 Mile with Eminem, Eminem is surrounded by a circle of friends that are always sort of kind of building him up. But there's one friend named Cheddar who's always kind of poking holes in his ideas. And what we realize through the film is that it's Cheddar that really sort of gets Eminem ready for the stage. And I think the same thing is true in our lives. We all have a cheddar. This is a friend or a family member who's kind of always poking holes in our idea, saying, yeah, what about this and what about that? And we tend to sort of kind of want to push that person away. But as it turns out, that is the person who's really going to get us ready for these backable moments, because they have our best interest at heart, and they're the ones who are willing to tell us the truth. They're the ones who are willing to point out our blind spots. So you got your collaborator, you have your coach, you have your cheerleader, and you have your cheddar. Yeah, I'm going to take you quickly back to the 1940s for a moment, because this is a great story. I love this story. In the 1940s, Betty Crocker introduces instant cake mix to the markets, and they know for sure that this is going to be a sensation, because all you have to do is add water to the mix, put it in the oven, and voila, you get this like really tasty treat. And so they're really, really surprised when they realize that sales are abysmal. No one's buying these instant cake mixes. And they're trying to figure out why. And so they hire this psychologist named Ernest Dykda to go out into the field and figure out what's happening here. So he starts interviewing homes across the country, and he realizes something. And what he realizes is that they had made the process of making a cake too easy, too simple. They had basically removed the customer from the creative process. So Dykda's recommendation is, why don't you remove one ingredient, just one, and see what happens? And so they do. They remove the egg. So now, as a customer, what you have to do is you have to buy a fresh egg, you have to crack it into the mix, stir it in, and then you put it in the oven. And sales take off. Because now, when the cake comes out of the oven, you really feel like you are a part of it. You feel some ownership over it. And this is a theory that's kind of been proven out over and over again. Researchers at Harvard called this the IKEA effect. And the IKEA effect basically tells us that we value something that we build up to 5 times more than something that we simply buy off the shelf. So, and I think this applies inside the room. It applies to creative ideas. In the book, we call it flipping outsiders to insiders, having people feel like it's their idea too, so that when you reach execution phase, you reach there together. But I think it also, back to your question, really applies to family. In 2016, I was living in San Francisco, and I really got interested after the presidential election in moving back to my hometown in Michigan and running for public office. I really wanted to get involved in what was happening in the world, and that was important to me. Now, the problem was, I had a family to convince as well. It wasn't just my decision. I had a wife, I had 2 kids. And so I go to my wife and I run this idea by her. I basically say, hey, how would you feel about the idea of us moving from San Francisco to Michigan for me to go run for office? And she says, I hate that idea. I don't want to move to Michigan. I want to stay right here. And so what ended up happening over the next few months is that we end up going through this push-pull where I'm like, this is something I really want to do. And she'd say, this is something I really don't want to do. And finally, I realized that what I was trying to do was basically sell her a piece of furniture, right? Instead of us building something together. And where we ended up landing on, Colin, was that we made a deal. And the deal was, we're going to move to Michigan and I'll run for office. If I win, then obviously we're going to stay. But if I lose, then she gets the call on the next location, no matter what. She's from the East Coast and maybe want to move back there closer to her family. But no matter what, she gets the call on the next shot. That's in her hands. Now, did that make her 100% feel 100% great about the idea at the time of moving to Michigan? No, it didn't. But she felt like she was part of the plan. I had handed her an egg. She was cracking that egg into the mix. And, we were building something together. One of the things that really stands out to me, and I think was probably one of my biggest mistakes early on that I was able to correct pretty quickly, was this idea that I think we're very tempted when we're pitching ideas to start with the market, to start with the numbers, instead of starting with the story. And I know that story and storytelling has become sort of a big theme. So I really want to unpack that and go a little bit deeper than just say tell stories. But let me tell you a quick story and then we'll get into that. So one of the people I pitched early on was Tim Ferriss. Tim was, investing in companies at the time. Mine was a healthcare company. It was a one-on-one nutrition coaching company. So you got matched with a personal nutritionist right over your mobile phone. We called it Rise. And, I pitched him because I felt like this was a company he'd be really interested in. He ended up passing on the idea, but he gave me some advice that really changed the way that I talk to investors. And the reason he gave me the advice is because I had pitched him with like 80% of my slides talking about the market, talking about the numbers, the rising rates in obesity and hypertension and diabetes. And at the very end of my presentation, I shared my father's story. And my father's story is that when he was in his 40s, he had a triple bypass surgery. And when we were leaving the hospital, we basically got a piece of paper saying, eat broccoli, eat Brussels sprouts. Well, we were an Indian family. We didn't really eat broccoli. We didn't really eat Brussels sprouts. So we kind of had to figure out how to customize our lifestyle. And once we did, we were able to sort of turn his health around. And I wanted to bring that type of care to more people who needed it. And he was like, look, why save that story to the very end? Bring it up to the beginning. Right. And the story that he gave me was that when he was pitching the 4 Hour Work Week, the book, he was turned down by 25 publishers in a row. 25. And he finally got the piece of advice to, why don't, instead of trying to write a book for the masses, why don't you rewrite this book with just one friend in mind? And so he did. And when he did, the writing just became so much more sharp. The storytelling just became so much clearer that it became a much more compelling book, and publishers ate it up, and eventually so did readers. And so when I flip that story and I talk about my father's story up front, I really get them invested in a central character, one person. Then I talk about the numbers. The pitch completely changed. I could see people leaning in a way that they never had before. What we were just talking about with the idea of like, how do you make someone see it through your customer's eyes, right? How do we start to bring it down to the level of one person, that one person that you're trying to serve? Michael Dubin is one of the people that we studied for this book. And, Michael Dubin started the Dollar Shave Club. I always kind of assumed that Dollar Shave Club sort of took off from the very beginning. It was one of those that sort of investors really kind of glommed onto. I didn't realize how tough it was for him to raise money in the early days. But I guess in a lot of ways, it kind of makes sense because he was pitching investors that were used to investing in things like automation, artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles. Like, how do you make like razors sexy to that audience? And what he shared with me is that, with Kirsten Green, for example, Kirsten Green ended up investing in Dollar Shave Club, but he said that he pitched her and she had zero interest. She had zero interest in the pitch deck that he sent over to her. Because again, the pitch deck was very focused on the numbers. But when he had a chance to meet her, and it was through a chance encounter, they did not set up a meeting. He could not get a meeting with her, but they ended up at the same dinner together. And they had a few minutes to chat. And instead of pitching her again on the numbers and the market size and what they could do from a business perspective, he said, let me take you into the eyes of a customer for a moment. You're a man, most likely in your 20s. You care a lot more about your health than your father ever did. That includes what you put inside your body and what you put on your body. You're used to sort of, an e-commerce polished experience right now and having things be very convenient. But when it comes to buying razor blades, you have to go into a grocery store. You have to go into a place like a Walmart where things are scattered, a little bit disorganized. You got to find exactly where the razor blades are. And then when you finally find them, you realize you have to push a button, actually calling somebody over the loudspeaker to come in and unlock a case, which, by the way, has things like laxatives and condoms inside, and people don't know what you're there to buy. And then he looks over your shoulder as you actually choose your item, and then you walk to the checkout counter and finally check out, and you finally get your razor blades. It's just so different than what we're used to with normal e-commerce sort of experiences. The whole thing was ready to be disrupted. And what Kirsten Green told me was that it was from hearing that step by step. It was from hearing that storyboard of that central character that she decided, like, I got to be a part of this. So imagine that. I mean, this is a venture capitalist. This is somebody who was an equities trader at one point in time. You would think that she would be all about the numbers, that only she would care about the numbers. But as it turned out, it was that one story. It was that one story that hooked her in. And then, of course, you have to have the substance as well. But it's the story that tends to bring us in, and it's the substance that tends to keep us there.